from So Very Crafty, and today we are here to make this terrific little build like a baseball cap hat. It is so cute and so simple to make, it's ridiculous. This is a truly beginner sewing project that anyone with basic sewing skills can make. I know it looks complicated, but it really isn't. It's got a nice lining, it's got a little button top, and a nice little bill, just like a baseball cap, but it's a little more feminine version of that model for those that want a little feminine style to this little cap. Super simple. But before we get started, I'm going to ask you to subscribe to my channel, give me a thumbs up, ding that bell for notifications so that you can get all of the future So Very Crafty videos on all of my projects that I do here on the YouTube channel. And head over to www.soverycrafty.com for more sewing and crafting videos or sewing and crafting projects that you don't get here on the YouTube channel. So what do we do and how do we get going on this adorable little cap? Well, let's get started. The first thing we're going to need is 2 pattern pieces. And I'm going to put the link for these pattern pieces in the description section underneath the video where it says see more. Now, there's going to be 2 sections. One is from a sun hat pattern that I did a while ago. You're only going to need the triangular piece from that pattern. And then one is the little bill, which is the front part, the little build piece from the hat that is sort of like the baseball hat. And what you're going to do is you are going to cut out, and I've already done that for you, the following pieces. 6 lining triangles, 6 outer triangles, 6 interfacing triangles, and I've used Pellon 808 or 809. Now 809 and 808 are the same thing. It's just one is doubled over and one is not, but they're exactly the same thing. So in this instance I used 809 because it's doubled over and I get more bang for my buck with the 809. The other thing that you are going to use is Pellon Peltex. And you're only going to need a very little bit of this. So just like 1/8 of a yard will get you what you need, because this is a very stiff interfacing. As you can see, it's quite stiff. And this is what's going to make our bill or the brim of our cap stiff. And we are going to cut 2 brim pieces. And that's all we need for this little baseball type cap. So how do we put this together? Well, the first thing we're going to do is we are going to fuse our interfacing onto the outer pieces of our triangles. And the way we do that is we're going to follow our manufacturer's instructions, and you are going to notice that there is a shiny side to this Pellon 809 or 808 and a flat side. We're going to take that shiny side and we are going to place it wrong sides together so that the shiny side is facing the wrong side of our fabric. We are going to head over to our hot iron with a damp cloth, and we are going to hit this with a hot iron, and we are going to then fuse this interfacing to the fabric piece. Now what you're going to notice is that the shiny side of this interfacing is actually glue. And the glue is going to melt into the fabric so that it becomes one piece of fabric, and you get some structure to your fabric that's going to give us a little bit more structure to our cap. So we are going to then fuse all 6 of our outer fabric pieces with the interfacing triangles that we created. And while we're over at the iron, we are going to take our piece of Peltex and we are going to fuse that piece of Peltex to the wrong side of our brim piece. Now you are going to notice that I have made this Peltex piece about 3/8 of an inch smaller than my brim piece. So when you cut out the bill piece from the bill piece pattern, you're going to trim off 3/8 of an inch all the way around so that you have this excess fabric all the way around when you go to fuse your Peltex to the outer piece of your brim or your bill. So I'm going to head over to the iron right now, and I'm just going to fuse this bill piece and these interfacing pieces, and then we're going to head on to our next step. Okay, now we're back, and we have fused our interfacing, as you can see, onto the reverse side of our triangles and on the reverse side of one of our bill or brim pieces. We're going to set aside our brim piece for the time being. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to take these triangle pieces and we are going to attach them and stitch them together to form the cap part of our brimmed cap. And we're going to do this in steps. First, we are going to pin two of them together. Now, if you're just a beginner sewist, you may want to use more pins, but for me, the 2 will be fine. Once you have stitched the 2 together, you are then going to add a 3rd piece to the 2. And we're placing these right sides together. And we're just going to add some pins here, and I'm just going to use my 2. And so you're going to have basically a piece of 3 triangles. Now I'm going to repeat that for my other 3 triangles. And then I'm going to come back and we are going to move on to our next step. So let's head over to the sewing machine and stitch these together. Okay, here we are at the sewing machine. And we are going to stitch our first 2 pieces together. And I'm going to be using a 1/2 inch seam allowance for this. Now, if your head is a little bit bigger than mine, you could use a lesser seam allowance, but for me, I'm going to use the 1/2 inch seam allowance. And you will see we have our two triangles joined together. And now I'm going to add a third. Making sure that these bottoms match up, and you can pin these or not pin these, depends on the level of your skills. As I stated, if you are a beginner sewist, you may want to use more pins. If you are a more advanced sewist, you may not use any pins. I'm just going to add a couple of pins here to show you that we can add a couple of pins here. And again, I'm going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now we have half of our cap sewn. And now I'm going to repeat this for the next 3 pieces. And then we're going to head back over to our workstation and we're going to move on to our next step. Okay, so now we have our 2 halves of our cap. We are now going to place our 2 halves of our cap right sides together, and we are going to stitch this all the way across the center. So we are going to just pin this, and again, if you're a more advanced sewist, you can use fewer pins than you need. If you are a more beginner sewist. And make sure that these bottoms match and the tips match. And we're going to head over to the sewing machine and we are going to just stitch all the way around in a big circle so that we have finished our outer part of our cap. Here we are back at the sewing machine and we are going to stitch again using a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around in a half circle our outer cap. Okay, we have finished our outer cap and we are going to turn this cap right sides out. And as you can see, it just looks like a half dome. And that's really all there is to it. And again, this, using the 1/2 inch seam allowance, fits perfect for my head, but if yours is a little bit bigger, you can use a 3/8 inch or even a 1/4 inch seam allowance to make this hat a little bit bigger, and it will work just fine. Now we are going to make our bill of our cap. We are going to take our bill pieces, place them right sides together, and we are going to stitch them using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. That's a 3/8 inch seam allowance for our brim pieces. And we're only going to stitch the side and the outer arc of this to create our brim before we attach it to our outer piece. Now we are back at the sewing machine, and we are going to stitch our brim piece, the sides, using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And you can pin this if you want. I'm not going to. And we're just stitching this outer edge of our brim. Now, we have finished our brim piece, and we are going to turn this piece right sides out. And now you can see that it looks more like the brim that it's going to look like on our cap. And I'm going to go over to the iron, and I'm going to press this so that my brim is nice and flat. Now our brim piece is finished. Snip off some of these excess threads. And the next thing we're going to do is we are going to pin our brim piece onto our outer cap piece so that it's like this. And you can pin it anywhere on the brim, on the outer piece. It doesn't really matter. I'm actually going to clip this using Wonder Clips. And if you don't have any Wonder Clips, I'm going to actually put the link of these into the discussion section so that you can purchase some of these if you like. They work a little better for this than pins because of the stiffness of the brim. And then I'm going to head over to the sewing machine, and I am just going to use about 1/4 of an inch of a seam allowance here just to attach the brim to the outer piece. And while I'm at the sewing machine, I'm going to take my lining pieces, my lining triangular pieces, and I am going to create a lining cap that's identical to the outer cap. I'm not going to show you on the video how to do that because it's going to be exactly the same as I did for the outer cap. It's going to be 3 and 3 and join them together, but we are going to leave an opening in one of these lining pieces. So you're only going to stitch down a little ways on one, leave an opening, and stitch down the rest, because we're going to have to turn this cap right sides out in a later step. So everything's going to be stitched together exactly the same way as the outer cap, but with an opening on one of the lining pieces. So let's head over to the sewing machine and take care of that, and we'll be back and finish this cap up. Okay, we're back at the sewing machine, and we are just going to stitch our brim. I'm going to take the table of my sewing machine off because it's going to make it easier. And I'm going to stitch my brim onto my cap, again using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And take your time on this because this brim is very stiff. And you'll want to line up these raw edges as you go. So there we have our brim onto our outer cap, but now we have to create the lining. And as I said, I'm not going to do this on the video. I'm just going to bat out this lining real quick, and we're going to head over to our next step. Okay, now we're back and we have our brim sewed on, and we have our lining cap with our hole in one side of the lining. So what we're going to do is we are going to place our outer cap inside of our lining cap with the brim snuggled in between the two layers, and we're going to line up these seams. And I'm just going to clip these. And as you can see, that brim gets nestled nicely in between the two layers. Now we're going to head back over to the sewing machine and we are going to stitch all the way around our raw edges here so that we can attach our lining to our outer cap. And then we're going to come back and finish off this project. Here we are back at the sewing machine, and I am going to use a 3/8 inch seam allowance to stitch all the way around my hat and my brim. Keep in mind this brim is very stiff. Okay, so now we have attached our outer cap to our lining cap. We are going to reach in to the opening that we left in the lining, and we are going to pull through the outer cap through the lining. And that's a very simple process. Just pulls right through, looks like that. Now I'm going to do two things. I'm going to head over to the iron, and I am going to press this lining so that it's nice and firm around the cap. I am going to stitch this opening closed using ladder stitch, which I am not going to show you on the video today, but you can go on YouTube and find a load of videos on how to do ladder stitch. It's a super simple hand stitch that is also known as invisible stitch. And then to really complete my cap, I have taken a button that I have covered in my lining fabric, and I'm just going to stitch it right on top of my cap here, and that's all there is to this project. So now we have two of our brimmed caps a little feminine version of our baseball cap. Super simple to make. I hope you enjoyed this project. If you did, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and give me a ding on that bell so that you get future notifications of So Very Crafty videos on how to make these fun and simple sewing projects for beginner and intermediate sewists. That's what we attract here at So Very Crafty, is we want beginners and intermediate sewists to know that they can make these projects without any trouble in very little time. So I hope, again, you enjoyed this project. Sew on your button, finish up your lining, and you are done. Thank you very much, and I will see you guys next time here at So Very Crafty. And while you're at it, head over to www.soverycrafty.com for more sewing and crafting tutorials that you won't see here on the YouTube station. So see you next time. Bye all.